Hello, I'm the Angry Spork, taking issue with the first death of Wolverine. Last week, we saw the newest Horseman of Death fight the X-Men over the fate of the powerful Manites. When the dust settled and Death decided the kids were all right to survive, Wolverine was left dead. Yes, even though the lack of adamantium left his healing factor much more powerful. Yes, even though there didn't seem to be anything particularly special about the weapon that killed him. Let's continue with Uncanny X-Men number 375 and see if a good old-fashioned home autopsy illuminates things for us. Written by Terry Cavanaugh, Alan Davis, and Adam Kubert, with art by Tim Townsend, Bat, Chris Sotomayor, and Liquid, the cover of this anniversary issue features Professor X about to perform an autopsy on Wolverine. It's a good tone-setting visual that is also very subdued in a way, though I remember when this issue was being advertised before its release, and they basically used this image with pixel censoring over Logan's face. But not his claws, so it looked kind of like this. Maybe a bit more pixelated, but still not exactly keeping the spoiler in check. Maybe Marvel's marketing department thought that was enough to throw people off. What with there being dozens of X-Men characters that have 3 claws protruding from the back of their hands. We begin with a credits page that also delves into Xavier's mission to help mankind, mentioning how the X-Men took off because it seemed like Chuck was cracking under the pressure, and finally the events leading up to Wolvie's demise. The story itself begins with Rogue, Kitty Pryde, and Nightcrawler in a penthouse, reflecting on their recent trials, helping Mystique, the recent erratic behavior of Lorna Dane, aka Polaris, possibly due to her boyfriend Alex Summers' death, and the diaries left behind by Rogue's foster mother, Destiny, warning of a global cataclysm. And that's when they get the call.
Yep, we're all here. What? No! That's not Absolutely, we're on our way!
That wasn't the call about Logan. It was a local sandwich shop saying their order was ready, but they don't deliver.
Colossus gets the news while on the road with Marrow and his brother, an unconscious Mikhail Rasputin, who was recently freed of a malevolent influence. Good thing they were headed to the X-Mansion anyway. Xavier has just finished a mind probe of the members of X-Force, necessary though unpleasant because they're kind of a weak link in the chain of X-Men affiliates. X-Force's fierce independence makes you vulnerable to infiltration.
Now, Professor, I can explain our newest recruit. We thought the stray dog was a mutant because its bark sounded a lot like "I love cake." If that's not a mutant power, I don't know what is. After all, why else would we post it on our YouTube channel dedicated to human-mutant relations?
Before he takes off to evaluate Generation X, which seems to include messing with Emma Frost's head, Storm says they have to return to the school. What follows is a 2-page spread of the X-Men and Moira McTaggart standing around the body of their fallen comrade. Some are clearly somber, upset, devastated, Rogue looking away, possibly in denial, though not all their expressions are perfect. Kurt almost looks bored and puzzled, and Gambit hardly looks affected at all. I don't know why Jean is a brunette all of a sudden, or, for that matter, why Wolverine's costume is almost completely shredded off. It was mostly intact when he died.
I mean, they lost the Blackbird, so I imagine they had to walk and or hitchhike the way back to the mansion, so maybe they took turns carrying him and had a few slip-ups along the way.
Cyclops sums up for the Professor the events leading up to their teammates' inexplicable demise, looking like a kinda neat movie poster, all things considered. And maybe that childhood head injury Scott suffered, the one that keeps him from controlling his powers, is having some lasting effects because that is not the sword Death used. I bet Sigmund Freud would have a time analyzing that alteration. Anyway, Beast will help Moira with the autopsy since it's the least he can do for his hairy buddy, so it's a good thing Mikhail's condition is stabilized. Though McTaggart wants to run some tests on Marrow since she was changed by Skrull technology on a previous mission.
For those unaware, Marrow initially looked something like this. But after some time travel and a little time spent on the Skrull homeworld, she looks more conventionally attractive because this is comics. Though, on the plus side, it'll be much easier for her to cosplay as Mina Ashido from My Hero Academia.
Kitty is still in disbelief that her mentor's healing factor failed him, and that she wasn't at his side. Rogue says they probably wouldn't have been able to do much of a difference against death and can now only bring him to justice. There are other allies that need to be informed of this loss, but Warren is more concerned about his girlfriend, Psylocke, making sure she's safe if mutants are being targeted. As Charles instructs everyone to head to the command center so the doctors can work, Archangel takes off. Literally, it looks like he's lifting off the ground here. Anyway, even though Betsy Braddock is still a formidable opponent even after losing her psionic powers, he's still too anxious to sit around and do nothing. Later, Scott has explained the story twice to Xavier, only for their words to become more heated. A sudden brownout doesn't help, the reaction that they may be under attack showing Chuck that Psyche has been lacking in discipline, and even accuses him of being under someone's control. Scott lashes back that his teacher's ways haven't created the world that he wanted, and it's making him unhinged, especially after the UN gave Genosha over to Magneto. Scott splits attendance into two groups: Team blindly believe the dream even though Xavier's gone nuts, and Team independent thinkers that agree with Cyclops and therefore must think he's oh so cool. Just as Nightcrawler tries cooling tempers down, Xavier goes all Phoenix right and accuses Phoenix of psychically manipulating Scott's mind.
She's his wife. She doesn't need telepathy to tell him what to do. Being a saucy redhead doesn't hurt either.
Charles attacks, though I'm not entirely sure how. He's not a telekinetic, and yet we see Jean hovering in a field of psionic energy. So I guess that's part of her reeling in pain or something? I don't know. Whatever's going on, Scott can tell it's ripping her apart and goes on the offensive, firing an optic blast at the prof, but he's narrowly saved by Shadowcat's phasing ability. But that beam has to go somewhere, and that somewhere is right in Storm's torso, knocking her against the wall. Charles then attacks One Eye, but then incurs Jean's fury in retaliation. Cable fires back, thinking Xavier was only defending himself, but then gets told the obvious that husband and wife were obliged to defend each other by his own alternate reality self. So it's extra weird. As the infighting escalates, Jean takes Scott and the four X-Men that seem to agree with them to retreat, only for the walls to collapse, separating the team.
This is exactly why I don't go to group therapy. Well, that and I was asked to leave. You punch one fellow patient and suddenly you're unstable. You know what's unstable? Wearing those t-shirts with the tuxedo designs with open-toed shoes. That's unstable, Steve!
The pro-Xavier group need to get the Prof and Storm some medical attention, but they take time to wonder whom of the other half they can blame for all this. Is Phoenix controlling people, or is X-Man the unknown element? Gambit has made a deal with Sinister in his ongoing title, and Marrow could have been changed by the Skrull tech, or Rogue might have been coerced by Mystique. Cable goes to scout for a way to get their wounded treated, while there are equal but opposite speculations from Team Psych, Scott himself apparently having been mind-wiped. Either Xavier was broken by Bastion or is regressing back into Onslaught, the malevolent manifestation of a minor mind merge with Magneto. Nate thinks Cable could be controlling the Professor, possibly after losing his fight with the techno-organic virus. Kitty could have been manipulated by the Skrulls, and Kurt has been acting a little weird recently. And hey, what about that time Colossus defected to Magneto's acolytes? Heck, even his brother Mikhail, who's in a coma, gets accused of being the mastermind.
You get accused of treachery. You get accused of treachery. Everyone's getting accused of treachery!
X-Man decides to go it alone to find the problem at its source, mentioning that Archangel was either in the know or awfully lucky to have left before all the chaos started. The rich boy, however, is still on his way to see Betsy as a storm approaches. He muses to himself how new it still feels to have his old feathery wings back, even after all these months, then is distracted by an object that's been tailing him for about 10 minutes. It's maintained its distance and elevation from him, so it's not likely a coincidence. So he starts zipping around in a pattern and at a speed that nothing man-made should be able to follow. He gets a better look at it as it passes overhead, noticing it's large enough to have a crew but doesn't seem to have any markings or portholes. and it happens to be heading right for his family estate. He makes a leap in logic that the pilot extrapolated his intended destination, which feels a bit convenient.
Maybe they thought you were headed to a coffee shop that's coincidentally in the same direction. Maybe you're being paranoid and they're aliens that are off to abduct one of your neighbors. It's not always about you, dude.
Back at the X-Men's base, Gambit almost has a tender moment with Rogue until Cable plays third wheel by exploding onto the scene. Literally. Jean pleads for him to reconsider, but he's not taking any chances, given what the Phoenix has been capable of before, and opens fire on his own mother. Marrow slashes at him only to be dealt a fatal blow. In between panels, which is kind of awkward. Seriously, we see Cable bragging about his scimitar's significance. Rogue reacts, Marrow's dead. That's actually worse than what Wolvie got. Rogue avenges the young woman, but her attack backfires, accidentally detonating a grenade on Cable's belt. On the other side of the debris, Charles and Aurora are too weak to be phased or teleported, and only getting worse as Nate Gray crashes in. His first attack on Xavier is taken by Piotr, leading Kurt to counterattack so Kitty can get away, but he's fatally attacked, apparently disintegrated. Nate chides them for not heeding his warning about how dangerous Professor X was, as Colossus, on fire, charges from behind and, using his last moments of life, impales young Gray on some pointy debris. Meanwhile, Worthington has followed the saucer to his home, with rocket-packed goons exiting the craft to attack. Fortunately, they're not well armored, so they go down in one flyby, one hit each. But he's immediately grounded by the unexpected arrival of himself.
Marvel Comics, the House of Ideas. Most of which are about clones and evil duplicates.
Remy cradles Rogue, begging her to hold on and professing his love. She says she loved the moments they've shared, but it was never going to work between them and he should move on, and she passes away.
You know, I believe in things like forgiveness and catching the perpetrator of a crime and having them face justice instead of executing them on the spot. But the mastermind of this attack caused the death of the hottest member of the X-Men, and for that they must die!
Likewise, Kitty Pryde is the only survivor on her side. Xavier and Storm have died from their injuries, and she kisses Peter goodbye as he shuffles off this mortal coil. Then, from Charles's corpse, arises the mastermind of all this death, Onslaught. And Remy LeBeau meets the manipulator of all the discourse, Dark Phoenix. Wait, what?
Two villainous entities targeting the same heroes at the same time in the same way? This is just really, really inconsiderate. You people need to learn to coordinate.
Everyone wakes up intact and not dead in the command room to Xavier's apologies for the psychodrama he orchestrated, though with some help from Cable, Jean, and even X-Man. This wasn't because his TV went out and he got bored, but because he'd discovered the team had been infiltrated. From Charles's erratic behavior that led to the dissolution of the X-Men to their recent pre-fight disagreements were all an act in order to verify that the team loners were who they appeared to be. Storm, Jean, and Scott were easy to confirm, and he called Nate and Cable to help with the tests, but when Wolverine died, Chuck had to speed things up. He constructed a scenario bringing each X-Men's deepest loyalties to the fore, authenticating all of them, though the question remains, who's the mole?
Maybe part of this story was born from a writer's idea to just get all the fake out and retcon deaths out of the way for these characters all in one go. But hey, at least no one actually killed Rogue. But technically, Xavier thought about it, so I'll just cut him up a little. Or break his legs. What, it's not like he's using them or anything.
Warren is having his tail feathers handed to him by his copy, but fortunately his girlfriend is a trained ninja and saves his butt. They make an escape just as we return to the Institute, where Beast and Moira have determined that even though the guy in the slab appears to be Wolverine on a physical level as well as molecular, his DNA lacks the X-Factor gene. It's a more superficial replication of Knucklehead genetic code, which, after the use of a counteracting compound concocted by McCoy,
the body reverts to its natural state, a Skrull. Thus explaining not only why Logan never healed, but why he got surprised by Cable. Maybe why he stuck by Jean and Scott after the team parted ways. Maybe even explaining why he would bother asking Cyclops permission for anything. He managed to fool everyone from closest friends to the most powerful telepaths for weeks. But there's a darker twist to this revelation. The Skrulls have managed to almost perfectly replicate Canadians. William Shatner, Colin Mockery, the Bare Naked Ladies, none of them can be trusted! Charles explains that weeks ago, when they'd returned from a time travel mission that brought them back a bit before they'd left, an electromagnetic pulse from Magneto struck their vessel and seemed to activate the ship's hibernation systems, leaving them all unconscious. Xavier could sense that a malevolent force was at work, but couldn't make sense of it at the time. It's likely that Wolverine was chosen because any other X-Man would require Skrull tech to replicate their powers, and a Logan duplicate would just have to avoid danger in lieu of a healing factor. Though the Skrull homeworld was gobbled by Galactus before the X-Men returned, there's no way to know what their plans currently are. Perhaps they're planning an invasion of some kind, one they wouldn't tell anyone about, a secret invasion, if you will. That sounds ridiculous. Warren and Betsy take time to make out and explain that Warren's hair confirmed he was the real deal as they head back to the mansion. There, the team awaits the arrival of X-Force and the rest of Generation X, as Sean Cassidy and a panicked Jubilee walk in, wanting to know if the news of their fallen comrade is true. Shadowcat almost spoils everything, but Charles and the other telepaths take them to another room to discuss the matter. It might be quicker and overall better to just wait for the other teams to arrive, along with Archangel and Psylocke, and only do one more round of mental trauma theater to verify their identities. Otherwise, it's going to look like Charles is actually enjoying this. Pride has been narrating this entire issue, but the captions are the type usually indicative of dialogue carried over from a different page or scene, which is kind of weird. Anyway, on the final splash page, she notes that what was said and done can't be reversed, and they still don't know where the real Wolverine is. This was not a bad issue for an anniversary event, especially since it seems more about the significance of the number 375 rather than the years of publication. Xavier's reasoning made sense, but it kind of pushed the limits of decency, and you see why there are some readers ready to accept the Professor Xavier is a jerk mindset. The art had a couple errors, but was overall consistently good, and I thought this fallout from Wolverine's death was actually done better than the death itself. Next up, we have X-Men number 95. Story by Alan Davis with art by Tom Rain, Scott Hanna, and Marie Javins. The cover features most of the team reeling back as Death rips open his cloak, as this issue features Death Revealed. He has problem skin. Beast, Moira, and Charles are analyzing the details of the dead alien subterfuge, though I'm not sure why it has a hole in its chest, possibly as part of the autopsy, but could be artists depicting the wound that killed him, which would be inaccurate compared to Astonishing X-Men, but the fact remains, Wolvie could have been taken anywhere in the universe. Probably to put him on one of their super teams, so Marvel can feature him in yet another book. On a 2-page spread, Wolverine, rather a Skrull taking on his classic gold and brown look, is fighting off a gang of his brethren, as narration notes the race's pride in their heritage as warriors and conquerors. They consider meeting their goals through subterfuge more honorable than direct combat, but hey, they're not too shabby at fighting. A commander is impressed with how efficient a killer the X-Man is, and is informed that simulating his physical form was easy. Programming a match for his psychology was another thing. An ally to the shapeshifters provided them with a complete record of Logan's psyche, taken from the real deal himself, all the better to fool the genetic tests and psi probes. Unfortunately, the Skrulls that have posed as Wolverine have been acting a lot like him, insubordinate, as if they really were him, though that's easily fixed, according to the specialist. Bonus, this current spy got the healing factor upgrade. Just not a very good one, considering he's dead with one shot of the commander's weapon. After their first operative's demise, their next Wolvie needs to be in perfect order so as to pass the X-Men's scrutiny. Turns out they had a bunch of specialized war scrolls, soldiers who could copy their subjects' powers as well as appearance, with the intention of causing some chaotic shenanigans within the Shi'ar Empire. But the X-Men's interference in the past resulted in the loss of the genetic strain. Efforts to resequence it have resulted in a number of mutated scrolls we see here kept inside a single pen.
Hey, could we get a couple magazines? Or a toilet? No? Yeah. Okay, I just figured we'd save the janitor the trouble is all.
One captive scroll, Fizz, has heard some stories, specifically how the Xavier and his X-Men, their supposed enemies, led the fight against Galactus, and he's trying to understand why the people they're trying to infiltrate would try to save their planet, yet the Skrulls' mysterious ally, allegedly so powerful, did nothing to help. His buddy Jack doesn't want to hear this talk. He's content to buy into the propaganda rather than the crazy talk of a better life. At the mansion, Storm convinces Xavier that exhausting themselves trying to look for Logan is not the answer. It's sad that he's gone, but he's a single piece of a larger puzzle, when there's a wider pattern to be found. After a Danger Room session, Kurt brings up the subject of Polaris with Scott and Jean. She feared she was being followed, but with no evidence to back it up, it was disregarded as a delayed reaction to Havoc's death, something his older brother Scott is still finding hard to believe. With the recent developments, however, there may be more to Lorna's paranoia. After all, a bunch of Skrulls are holding a board meeting to discuss getting a device to counter her magnetic powers. Coincidence? Their ally selected her as one of the 12 and must be secured. Surveillance footage sees her welcome 3 of the X-Men implicitly until they leave. Cleverly thinking ahead, they figure there might be a secret password to confirm identities amongst the X-Men, so they have another disguise she won't question.
Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson? The Domino's delivery guy? Oprah?
Lorna is quietly reading when there's a knock at the door. It turns out to be her thought-dead boyfriend, Alex Summers. In trying to convince her, he gets close enough to slap a power-dampening collar on her. Polaris mentions that the magnetic field of Alex's body was all wrong just before passing out, which gives the Skrulls something to update in their database. Orders insist this agent complete his task and wipe the woman's short-term memory, but since she's one of a dozen people their ally wants, he takes the initiative by taking her. In Egypt, a Skrull tells a high priest that they've acquired an artifact, one which will enable them to restore the occupant of the imposing sarcophagus. Then it's back to the commander who abducted Lorna, returning to base and threatening nearby underlings with ultimate punishment if they start gabbing about taking one of the 12. I'm guessing by ultimate punishment he means they'll either be one more dayed or new 52'd. He passes by yet another Wolvie copy, something which Lorna is conscious enough to notice as well. The portly Skrull that led the business meeting earlier isn't too happy with this abrupt development, feeling this could have dire consequences. When a cloaking device is detected, that's Lorna's cue to reveal that she'd been playing possum and uses her optic blasts?
Oh, sweet mercy, please tell me they did not give Lorna Dane the Harper Row treatment and just hand her a bunch of the other X-Men's powers on top of her own.
Nah, Cyclops was just using an image inducer, and since the collar was specifically designed with Polaris' magnetic powers in mind, his abilities worked just dandy. It was a team effort unveiling their plan, between Lorna detecting their spy's magnetic field, Nightcrawler locating him, and Phoenix probing their commander's thoughts, as he posed as Havoc. Just as it's declared Psyche is another of the 12, and is then to be taken alive, the rest of the team bust in, and you can almost hear the 90s cartoon theme song. Scott demands to know where Wolverine is, but the Skrull in charge doesn't know, something Jean can confirm. One of the shapeshifters suggests attacking her, but she's also one of the 12. Really hard to fight your enemies when you can't, fight them. Shadowcat sneaks up on the bickering pair, knocking one with a boot,
of her boot. Is that a sound effect or just labeling the obvious? Anyway, the Skrull-fluent Pride asks about the 12, doing her best to take after Wolvie and promise things will only get more painful the longer she goes without an answer.
This is the result when a young woman is both mentored by Wolverine and, coincidentally, spent the last 2 weeks binging 24.
Young Catherine is not on the list of untouchables, so she's fair game, but Colossus steps in to throw her attacker aside. But his dialogue is just odd here. He tells the foe that Kitty was solid when she was struck. Well, obviously, how else is he going to attack her? And how well he knows her and she was not bluffing about her threats. It's just, we got that she meant what she was saying. We don't need Peter to tell us this. She was doing just fine on her own. Well, that tossed Skrull creates an opening for the deformed Skrulls to join the fight, but Fizz is still intent on finding a better way. Death teleports in and sneaks past the fray, taking out a Skrull to take his space briefcase. He places a bomb near a primary power conduit, something Marrow is apparently savvy enough to know because that's what she says as she lunges for an attack. He smacks her away, managing to avoid harm from her skeleton armor, and she figures that they must have fought before. It's confirmed for those that haven't met him yet that this is the guy that killed the fake Logan, and Jean advises everyone to not hold back, as only all their power will take him down.
Sorry, darling, but all that and more won't even come close.
Gee, I wonder who this Horseman of Death could be. I bet the revelation will be super surprising.
The bomb detonates, causing a chain reaction throughout the base, but the X-Men and some Skrulls are saved by the combined efforts of Storm and Phoenix. Death apparently lost track of that case he came for, and when he finds it, Colossus punches him to the ground. But he gets up as if it didn't really affect him. And remember just how powerful Colossus is supposed to be. He's fought Thor.
Peter shattered his mask. We can see Death's face.
How can you shatter fabric? It's fabric! And why are you declaring that you can see his face when you're in the process of seeing his face?
Yeah, his dialogue speaking to Marrow and Jean kind of gave it away. But now he's speaking with a bit more eloquence as he declares Wolverine is no more and Apocalypse is his master, yada 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 yada. So he teleports away, and Storm reminds the team that there are some other explosions that haven't exploded, and they need to run away from those. As they catch their breath just outside the smoldering remains of the Skrull base, most of them are certain it's the real Logan this time, and Kitty noting how this was foretold in Destiny's diaries. And with Apocalypse back in the picture, life itself may well be at stake.
Ending that issue. I enjoyed the art, can't say I found much wrong with it, and it was a solid progression of the story, but they definitely stumbled with some of that dialogue.
Not just with characters declaring the obvious, but Death speaking more like Wolverine, which is kind of a dead giveaway to their big surprise. Whenever he did speak beforehand, rare as it was always more a proper manner, no contractions or apostrophes, something he reverts back to when his identity is revealed. It would have been better not to have him speak at all, or at least in fewer words that were consistent in Death's mannerisms, not Logan's. And what, is his knife like phasing through this guy now? What? Oh, I don't even know anymore.
We aren't quite finished yet, though. Next week, we see the new Death take on a mission in the name of his evil master, and get details on how the old knucklehead landed this new career. I'm the Angry Spork, and man, have I got issues.